What is up, guys? My name is Rossiter, and today I'm going to do something a little bit different. First of all, I am not leaving YouTube, despite what you may have heard, and I will explain why in a future video. Also, if you guys haven't seen today's entry in Rossiter's 12 Days of Christmas, there will be a card in the top right corner taking you there. Anyways, shameless self-promotion aside, let's get right into this. So, I had a project to work on at school, and it involved making a video at one of the 3 revolutions that happened in colonial times. Specifically, my topic is the Haitian Revolution. Now, as a white man, I'm probably not the most qualified to talk about this, but I'm going to anyways, because it's an important and often overlooked event in history. The year is approximately 1730. A lot of the economy in the Caribbean at the time was centered around sugar, an extensive labor crop. So, naturally, French farmers in modern-day Haiti, also known as Saint Domingue, turned to slavery, for the same reason as American cotton farmers. Thanks to slave labor, Saint Domingue was the leading exporter of sugar, alongside Jamaica, which is owned by Great Britain at the time. People in Saint Domingue were usually divided into 3 groups: whites, slaves, other free people of color, also known as gens de couleur. The whites were either plantation owners or part of a lower class, which were usually overseers, artisans, or shopkeepers. Free people of color were usually the children of a white plantation owner and an enslaved woman, but they also sometimes bought their freedom in the form of manumission. They also were usually craftsmen or shopkeepers. However, the slaves who were working on all the plantations outnumbered the other 2 classes 10 to 1. And despite this, slavery took place in extremely harsh conditions. Diseases such as malaria and yellow fever were extremely common, and roughly half of all slaves died within the first year of arriving to Saint Domingue. That only fueled the colony's insatiable hunger for new slaves. In fact, the death rate was so high that slave women would often marry several different men at once. So, because of the high death rates, the farmers decided to make them work as hard as possible in exchange for the bare minimum living conditions, because they were going to die of yellow fever anyway. And to be frank, that really didn't help the conditions at all. Now, the crazy thing about Saint Domingue is that it wasn't just the whites treating the slaves poorly. Everyone hated each other regardless of race. A French historian named Paul Fregrossi wrote, "Whites, people of color, and blacks loathed each other. The poor whites couldn't stand the rich whites despised the poor whites, the middle-class whites were jealous of the aristocratic whites, the whites born in France looked down upon the locally born whites, people of color envied the whites, despised the blacks, and were despised by the whites, free blacks brutalized those who were still slaves, Haitian-born blacks regarded those from Africa as savages. Everyone quite rightly lived in terror of everyone else. Haiti was hell, but Haiti was rich." By 1789, the French National Assembly declared that all men were free and equal. Yay! The slaves are now free and everyone lived happily ever. Not really. They were rather vague about whether this applied to women, slaves, citizens of the colonies, etc. As a result, the wealthy whites were like, oh cool, now I can exploit my slaves however I want and get even more rich. Meanwhile, free people of color were repeatedly appealing to the French for full civil rights since the 1780s. One guy named Vincent Auguier, is that how you pronounce it? Demanded that he gain the right to vote, but the governor said nope. So he led a revolt with about 300 free blacks to end racial discrimination. The crazy thing is, the slaves haven't even done anything yet. They've just been standing on the sidelines the whole time. But that was all about to change. Predictions of a revolt began in 1791 when the French revolutionary government tried to give wealthy free people of color citizenship. But the white plantation owners refused to recognize this decision. French writer Guillaume Reynaud claimed that this was a sign of the impending storm. The predictions came true on August 21st when a tropical storm began to roll into the Caribbean. Thousands of slaves joined a secret voodoo ritual somewhere on the island, and then they began to kill their masters, destroy their plantations, and burn their crops in revolt later that night. Just 10 days later, slaves led by a man named Toussaint Louverture had control of the entire northern part of the colony. In response to the revolt, the French Legislative Assembly granted political and civil rights to free men of color in Saint Domingue, and they also sent 6,000 soldiers and a new governor. La guerre félicite son thonax. Wow, that's a lot of accent marks. In 1793, France decided to declare war on Great Britain. White planners arranged with Great Britain for them to get sovereignty over Saint Domingue. William Pitt the Younger, the current prime minister, thought that taking the colony would allow them to bargain easier with the French and would fill up the treasuries. Spain, who controlled the rest of the island, helped the slaves fight the French. They supplied them with food, arms, ammunition, medicine, and naval support. After defeating the French, the British decided to restore slavery wherever they went, so now the rebels were right back to where they were before. In order to get the colony back, Sonthonax declared that slavery would be abolished in not only Saint Domingue, but all French colonies. The revolutionary government welcomed abolition, and they used these beliefs as a way to morally triumph over Britain. 600 British soldiers who had arrived there were much too small to conquer the island like they were supposed to. Meanwhile, oh look, here's the Spanish army with that Toussaint Louverture guy I was talking about. After some talks with the Spanish, he's decided to join their side and attack the French. Then, after some more talks with the Spanish, he learned that they weren't going to end slavery, so he betrays the Spanish and starts fighting for the French instead. By 1795, the Spanish back off, and Toussaint tries to reason with the surviving Frenchmen and tries to get them to rebuild the colony. Meanwhile, the French general André Rigaud drove out the British in the south by taking the town of Léogane. That French calm down with the accent marks? By then, most of the soldiers have died from yellow fever. Rigaud went on to take Port-au-Prince and the Tiburon Peninsula. And now, we interrupt your regularly scheduled program for a brief episode of People in Power Have Puny Pundits. At this point, Prime Minister Pitt decided to do a big oopsie by attempting to send the largest group of men yet to Saint Domingue. 30,000 men and 200 ships. But everyone knew going there was a mistake. 4 different regiments rioted because they didn't want to die of yellow fever. And they were right. Out of the 66th regiment, 802 out of the 1,000 men were infected with yellow fever. About 10,000 troops landed by June, and all they did was stay put in the town of Port-au-Prince while yellow fever killed them off one by one. This concludes today's episode of People in Power, Puny Pundits. We now return to your regularly scheduled program. The British pushed Toussaint's army back for a little bit, but they erased the progress they made with the counter-offensive. Then Toussaint did a little bit more by attacking the British Fort Churchill, which they failed. By the end of this, the British had lost 100,000 men and £4 million. That's a lot of cash. Meanwhile, in the south of the island, André Rigaud had been conspiring against Toussaint for a while now, and in June 1799 he attacked Petit Goave and Grand Goave, taking no prisoners and killing everyone. Now the United States is starting to get involved. Although they hated Toussaint, they agreed to help him fight Rigaud by sending the USS General Greene. It assisted him in his siege of Jacmel. By 1800, Toussaint took the city and Rigaud fled from Saint Domingue. But it still isn't over. There's still one last man who wants to take the colony. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce you to Napoleon Bonaparte. In 1801, after driving out the British and Rigaud, Louverture decided that he would be governor for life and that Saint Domingue would be independent and sovereign from France. Napoleon, the current leader of France, really didn't seem to like this, so he sent an army over to the colony led by his brother-in-law Charles Leclerc to take it back. He had a massive plan to restore slavery and arrest Toussaint. And to top it all off, the French were supported by men led by none other than André Rigaud. They arrived in February 1802, demanding the city of Le Cap from the Haitians. Instead of surrendering the city, the Haitians set fire to the city instead, like true patriots. Then Leclerc tried to lure Toussaint out of hiding by sending him letters. When he still didn't show up, Leclerc declared him illegal? What? And ordered everyone to hunt for him and kill him. His plan of attack? Destroy roads, stuff buildings with corpses, burn everything. And that's exactly what General Jean-Jacques Dessalines did to Léogane. He burned the town down and killed all of the Frenchmen there. Leclerc ordered 4 columns of men to march on the main Haitian base, Gonaves. Toussaint tried to stop one of the columns, led by General Donatien de Rochambeau, at a gully in the mountains. After 6 hours of close combat, he failed, although he did put a severe dent in their numbers. Next, they tried to stop him at a British fort called Crête-à-Pierre. Jeez, calm down with the accent marks. The other 3 French columns were converging on the fort, and they got stuck in a ditch while the Haitians had dug earlier. When they tried to cross the trench, General Dessalines' men opened fire, forcing them to retreat. The Haitians charged them down, killing any French that still stood. Leclerc managed to escape wounded. After 20 days of siege from the French, they fled after their food and ammunition finally ran out. After this battle, they began to resort to guerrilla warfare, using the element of surprise. At the very same time, the rainy season had begun, as well as yet another outbreak of yellow fever. The murderous disease caused about 10,000 casualties from the French. But then, everything suddenly changed. Suddenly, things changed on April of 1802. One of the generals defected with much of the Haitian army over to the French. Louverture was promised his freedom if he agreed to integrate his remaining troops into the French army, and he agreed to this on the 6th of May. Now, why does Toussaint want to do this? I don't freaking know. Leclerc gave his solemn word that slavery would not be restored in Saint-Domingue, that blacks could be officers in the French army, and that the Haitian army would be allowed to integrate into the French army. He also gave Toussaint a plantation in Ennery. However, he was tricked. He was seized by the French and shipped to France, and he died months later in prison. Shortly afterwards, Dessalines rode into Le Cap to submit to France and was rewarded by being made the governor of St. Mark. However, these surrenders did not mean the end of Haitian resistance. Throughout the countryside, guerrilla warfare continued, and the French staged mass executions via firing squads, hanging and drowning Haitians in bags. There was even a new kind of execution made, called fumigational sulfurous baths. Think of these as like makeshift gas chambers. Eventually, word got out that they were planning on restoring slavery, so black cultivators revolted in the summer of 1802. Yellow fever had already decimated the French. It's just sick. It's very sick, no pun intended. It got to the point where they started hiring the Polish for their army. There were as many as 5,000 Polish soldiers serving in the French army. Many of them believed that if they fought for France, Bonaparte would reward them by restoring Polish independence, which had been ended in 1795. And of those 5,000, about 4,000 of them died of yellow fever. I'm serious, yellow fever is not funny. It's not funny. I don't know why I'm chuckling at this. As for Dessalines, he remained allied with the French until they switched sides again in October, and they started fighting against the French. After hearing about this, General Leclerc ordered that all of the blacks living in Le Cap were to be killed by drowning. Later in November, he died of yellow fever, like much of his army. Successor, Rochambeau, who was the guy who fought in Crête-à-Pierrot, he ordered that everyone who was black were to be killed. He imported about 15,000 attack dogs from Jamaica, and he would hold mass drownings at Le Cap. No one would eat fish from the bay for months afterward, because no one wanted to eat fish who had eaten human flesh. But Dessalines was about as cruel as Rochambeau. At Le Cap, when Rochambeau hanged 500 blacks, Dessalines responded by killing 500 whites and sticking their heads on spikes. Rochambeau's atrocities helped rally many former French royalists to the rebel cause. The rebels finally managed to defeat the French at the Battle of Vertières on the 18th of November, leading the first ever nation to successfully gain independence through a slave revolt. After this, Napoleon accepted his defeat in his ventures in the Western Hemisphere, and he pulled out of Haiti in order to combat Prussia, Britain, and Spain in the Eastern world. By the end of November, Rochambeau had surrendered to Dessalines and the Haitians, and by the new year, Dessalines officially declared the former colony's independence, renaming it Haiti. Their economy, unfortunately, never recovered from the war, and for nearly 20 years, there was a civil war all across Haiti. Everyone was fighting for control. Dessalines was assassinated, and a man named Jean-Pierre Boyer, at the end of all this, declared himself the leader of Haiti. So I believe I covered just about everything. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments if I should do more stuff like this in the future. But anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. If you want to see more content from me, leave a comment down below, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye-bye!